greetings and welcome everyone. You are in another episode of the Health, Wisdom, and Wealth Show. I'm Velyn Hawkins, your host, and my very special guest today is Maya Acosta. And I'll tell you a little bit about Maya before we get into our interview, but we're going to be talking about the whole food plant-based movement and that it is alive and well, and the things that are happening that are helping people to learn more about living a whole food plant based lifestyle and getting better results in their health, in their wisdom, and their wealth. And we're going to be talking about that today. So, right now, Maya is co leader of the plant based Dallas Fort Worth PlantPure Communities Pod, and she's a wellness coach at the North Texas Vascular Center located in Dallas, Texas. And for many years, Maya has been passionate about helping everyday people understand that they have the power to upgrade their health. Our outreach work first began at our husband's vascular center, Dr. Rizwan Bukhari, who is a vascular surgeon and co-leader of their pod. Maya's desire had been to provide resources for their patients in order to empower them to live this lifestyle. And this outreach work eventually moved to a broader audience where she and Dr. Riz formed the organization called Plant-Based Dallas Fort Worth, and they became pod leaders. Now, she's going to tell us about her story about prior to COVID-19, what they did with the pods, and during COVID, and now as we're getting more into post COVID. But right now, I just really want you to tune into the fact that Maya is an entrepreneur and a whole food, plant based vegan lifestyle advocate. And I want to welcome her to the show. Hi, Maya. Welcome to the show. And I just realized I did not share my screen. So that's okay. I'm going to do it real quick right now because I think that our audience deserves to see the powerful person that you are. And I'm just so grateful that you're here with us today.
Thank you, V. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's an honor to be on your show. I have said that I've been watching your episodes and I love what you're about, your energy, the topics that you cover. They're very much aligned with the things that interest me as well. So, yes, I'm inspired by your guest.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. And the fact that our audience, I really want them to know that everything that we're doing is for the benefit of our audience. And the fact that this message is so important
Hmm.
that you've got a podcast show, and many of my other guests who've been on have their own podcast show. And I'm really grateful to be in this conversation with you today because a lot of people have heard plant-based. A lot of people have heard whole food plant-based and, do the diet and what's the lifestyle all about. And I know that you've been in this space for quite a while. Tell us a little bit more about your journey to not just helping Dr. Riz and starting the pod, but your journey to coming into this space of being a health coach and,
Hmm.
a plant-based advocate.
Yes. Well, thank you again. And yes, I love to tell people about how we got to this place where we are today, because I've been on a journey for quite a while before I met my husband, and so many times, even my mother once said, "Oh, so it was Riz who got you to go plant based," and I said, "No, Mom, actually, this started many years ago." So I'm going to try to tell my story in the short version of it, at least. It all started really in college. I took a nutrition class. I was an undergrad. So my undergrad was in psychology. I had planned on pursuing a PhD in psychology. It's just something that has always intrigued me. But didn't have a healthy relationship with food. So I was living with this fear of having, being overweight, which at the time you can imagine, many young girls today still live with, being judged. But I was seeing issues within my own family, and so I had unhealthy relationship with food. I also would restrict or sometimes even get to the point of starvation to numb myself from feeling a lot of pain that I was experiencing from just childhood trauma. So that's really the gist of how I spent the rest of my adult years trying to find a healthy way of living. And so, yes, during that time in college as well, I happened to come upon footage, and I can't tell you where I saw this, but either it was in my class or in a documentary. But I basically saw how cows were slaughtered, and then the entire process of how cows are then turned into ground beef, for example. So seeing that sometimes cartilage and other parts of the animal end up in sausage or ground beef created like this awareness inside of me that that's just not ever going to be in my body ever again. And I was in my 20s when that happened. So you can imagine growing up in a traditional Mexican home because we are immigrants. So a lot of our ways came with us. We consume every part of the animal. And so at that time, I couldn't do it anymore. Overnight, I stopped eating red meat and pork, and then spend the rest of my life trying to figure out what I could eat because I was very turned off by chicken, dairy, and eggs. Um, so I wasn't ethical at all. So this had nothing to do with ethics. It had to do with my wanting to be healthy. And so I was mainly a pescatarian, and we're talking about many, many years ago when, I started eating sushi before it became as popular as it is today. Ceviche. I was just doing recently a food demo where I taught people how to eat a healthy version of ceviche, which is more like a kind of like instead of a shrimp cocktail, you use fish in lime. So, yes, that's basically how I consumed food with ceviche. When I met my husband, I was living in San Diego at the time, and I had already started having health problems, and I didn't know why. I did know that in my 30s, I was lethargic, had low energy, I slept a lot during the day. I was probably 35 years old when a coworker of mine said, "You know, you have the health of a 50-year-old. Like, you are really, I can't believe, for your age that you're as tired as you are." And V, I'm happy to say that I am 50 and I feel better than I did when I was in my 30s. But that, it was all because I discovered that as a result, probably of consuming as much fish as I did, I developed hypothyroidism, which contributed to adrenal fatigue and being overweight, cold hands, feeling lethargic, hair loss. My hair was thinning when I was younger. I couldn't believe it, and all of this awareness as about hypothyroidism came as a result of listening to talk radio. And this particular show that I would listen to had different guests on the show, and including doctors. And sure enough, there's a doctor talking about hypothyroidism. And I realized these are the symptoms that I have. This is what's going on with me. So, and I want to kind of pause right here and say, that for me, that's exactly why it's important that you and I do this work of having guests come on the show and talking about topics that you don't see on television, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So a lot of times you have the other shows that are sponsored by big pharma or big food, and so the doctors say what you know their sponsors want them to say. What
Mm-hmm.
what you and I are doing are we're raising awareness about how food affects us both negatively and positively. And in this case, with my own health, I took a real beating from eating fish. So what I did, still trying to make my story a little shorter, but I went to my dentist. I was living in San Diego, like I said. I went to my dentist and said, I've been doing research on mercury poisoning, and I want these old amalgam fillings that I've had in my mouth for years. I want them out. And I had done some research of how to do it safely because that could also have some repercussions depending on how they're extracted. So that's how I chose that dentist. And she said to me, "Have you ever been tested for mercury poisoning?" And I said, "No, but I do have these symptoms. I do consume fish and I've had concerns." And she said, okay, we're going to order some labs. And that's what we did. She did hair, urine, and blood analysis. She ordered those labs. And when the results came in, I had mercury poisoning. Like I had high, like past, like alert. Here's the red alert button here or whatever. Very high levels of mercury.
Wow.
And I was scared. I was so scared. Because you hear that sometimes mercury can cross that blood brain barrier,
Yeah.
that it
Yeah.
can contribute to Alzheimer's and dementia or mental uh, issues.
Ish-
Yeah, so
Wow.
I was very scared. So I had the amalgams extracted. I stopped eating fish. This right now was before I met my husband. So I went to an endocrinologist with my book on hypothyroidism, and I said, "Look, this is what I'm dealing with. This is what I know." And he kind of just blew me off a little bit and said, "Look, we're going to do glutathione. We're going to put you on IV drops. So you come in and we're going to do treatments with glutathione to help extract the mercury and also to support your body vitamin C. We know about the power of vitamin C. And so that's what I was doing. At the same time, I was on this kind of spiritual path. I was learning Reiki. I was learning to work with my energy. I was going to group meditations in the San Diego area. So it was like I was on this spiritual path, but I didn't know that food played
Hmm.
such a significant role in everything in our overall wellness. Um, so fast forward, I meet my husband. I end up relocating to Dallas, and Dallas is where I changed my whole life, where I became plant based. And how that happened was that my endocrinologist kept prescribing medication to support my adrenals, and um, and I was on desiccant. I can't think right now, but the thyroid medication, and all of that caused this tremendous weight gain. And I would say that over the course of about 6 weeks, I must have gained about 20 pounds. And I was new in my relationship, and suddenly I like I and I say I blew up because I was you can tell when people are on certain medications, their face gets very round and bloated, and that was me. My legs swelled up. I was very round everywhere, and I felt horrible. So I kept looking, I kept researching. We happened to live right across from a Whole Foods. And so I went to a Whole Foods. I found The Start Solution by Dr. John
Okay.
McDougall.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
that was it. I mean, that book, along with an influencer on YouTube who was a raw foodist, she talked about how, we don't have to harm animals and we can be very healthy, energetic, and athletic if we wanted to. And so after her, I went overnight. And it took Riz about another year of watching me because we were traveling a lot. So he watched me, he learned, and then I took him. That same Whole Foods, Rip Esselstyn was on tour promoting one of his books. I think it was My Beef with Meat.
Okay. Okay.
And that was it. I mean, I can go on and on, but Rip was the one person that was the first time that Riz heard from an individual that the same disease that he trained to treat,
Mm-hmm.
cardiovascular disease or atherosclerosis, that same disease could be reversed. When my husband was in training, that was not the case. What he learned was you're just going to have to treat and manage the patient for the rest of his or her life. And Rip was saying, no, you can actually reverse, heart disease and things like that. So he came home to do his research, to read the China study, and he made the change. So I'll
Mm-hmm.
stop there for now.
Oh my goodness,
Yeah.
what a remarkable story. And I'm just so excited to hear this piece of it all because it's important for people to know that this is a journey. And the thing that gets you started is the place to start. And I remember hearing the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, or there's two best times to plant a tree. That was 20 years ago, and then today.
Yes.
And so we are at today. What a remarkable story. I love that. And Whole Foods back then, I think, was one of the best places. And I was in California at the time that I got introduced to Whole Foods. And they were doing these live presentations and stuff like that. And I remember seeing this woman actually taking someone through Whole Foods, through the produce section, and showing them stuff. And all I could think was, wow, that's interesting. And then to see years later that she was actually teaching that woman how to find the foods and do, what are they? I mean, I was one that, the different kinds of vegetables that I see today was like, I don't know what that is. I loved eggplant parmesan, but then it was like, so I'd never seen an eggplant until, years later. And then I'm like, is that what that is? And coming to learn about stuff like even whole grains, ancient grains, quinoa. I was like, okay, quinoa. So how do you spell it and where do I go get it kind of thing? And, and my point being that this really is a journey. And I think that whether you're starting or you're already on the road, it's important to kind of keep these milestones in mind too, because you never know when your story is going to be able to be told to help someone else. So
Absolutely.
thank you for that. So do me a favor, Maya. I think this is a great segue to tell us a little bit more about the Plant Pure communities. I know that, it's kind of tied in with the Esselstons. It's kind of tied in with PCRM and just tell us, what do you do as a
Mhm.
pod leader and why is it important for you?
Yes, thank you. So, many of us learn about this way through either reading a book, hearing a lecture, or watching a documentary, right? And there are other ways, but in terms of education and information that's put out there, we learned about the China study, like a lot of us did. And one of the co authors of the China study, the main physician, Dr. T. Colin Campbell, wrote the China study, co wrote it with his son, who is also a physician, Thomas Campbell. And so that really got people to understand the power of food. His son, Nelson Campbell, who is also interested in health, created and founded PlantPure communities. And he put together a film that was released, I want to say, either in 2015 or 2016 called PlantPure Nation. So Riz and I were already understanding the power of food when we watched the documentary. And that documentary like really shook me. Like even when I remember initially seeing it, I think of the goosebumps that I was feeling because what he does in that film is really he's showing you two things. He's showing you he's running these jumpstart programs, and it's all documented where he's showing you that within 10 days, people can see a significant change in their biometrics. So he was doing the labs before and after the 10 days and feeding a group of volunteers nothing but whole food plant-based foods that were prepared. So all the people had to do was just consume the food and then kind of give some testimonials as to the changes that they were feeling. And so in the film, he's showing this and he's trying to lobby for this way of living. Like you see that there's politics behind, trying to create change at a bigger level. And so you experience the frustrations along with him as you're watching the film. And towards the end, after his program was rejected and not recognized for what he was trying to achieve on a larger scale, he kind of does a plea to the public and says the change has to happen from the ground up. The change has to happen at a grassroots level.
Right,
So
right.
rather than waiting for our politicians to prescribe this way of eating, rather than waiting for the rest of the world to change, we need leaders. We need you to create a group in your location to start supporting people in this way of eating. And so I got chills in it because at that time I was still new to all of this, but I said, I want to do that. That inner child and said, I want to do that. I want to be part of the change. I know that we can do this. And plus I knew that if we had this information, w- Riz's patients needed to know it as well. Because by the time you become a patient of my husband's, your quality of life will go down. And you will spend the last years of your life, 10, 15 years of your life, suffering and going through your savings because, all the treatments cost money. So, as a pod leader, my husband and I became what are called pods, or a pod in Dallas. And I kind of wanted to define that and share that for anyone who may not be familiar, because the goal of us being part of the pod is to help spread the information and offer support. So basically, pods are independent groups consisting of like minded people who are working together to spread the message of plant based nutrition in their communities. So we want to have fun and we want to build relationships. Most of us that come on board who adopt a whole food plant based lifestyle are the only ones in our family, right? Like we're alone. We're the only, and sometimes even in marriages, there's the one person and then the spouse doesn't want to come on board, or it could be the couple, the children don't want to come on board. So what we create are support groups, and they're physical. Before the pandemic, we partnered with a library and we hosted events on a monthly basis where we would have either a movie that we would screen, like Eating You Alive or What the Health, and then we would add a educational component to it by having either a panel discussion or having testimonials of people who have been living this way and have seen change. So we were doing that, potlucks, where we invite people to prepare a meal and then we all sit and eat together. So it's really a sense of community that we were offering. It was also a nice way to invite patients without signaling them out, without them being so obvious. And then over time, I started inviting people who could talk about stroke rehabilitation, for example, or heart disease. So even some of my guests were not fully plant based, but I wanted them to speak about disease in general because it's still very real. Whether you are a whole food or not, disease still exists. So anyway, that's what we were doing. So we go by Plant-Based DFW. I do add the Dallas Fort Worth at the end because I've been asked before, what is DFW? Well, that's Dallas Fort Worth. So we're here in Dallas, and so had a lot of great things planned. Like you probably hear people in our community say, we had a lot of things lined up, and then that came to a halt. And because of that, I decided to focus more on the podcast. And our podcast started in 2018 and it went by the same name, Plant Based DFW. And I thought, again, I was thinking, well, if patients can't come to our physical location, maybe they can tune in and hear the speakers or some of the guests talk about nutrition and eventually lifestyle medicine. And so, but yeah, I started focusing a lot more and really decided to dedicate myself to the podcast because the I mean, I wasn't all I'm a shy person. You probably, it's funny that I would say that, but I'm an introvert
I
and I
am
can
too.
be. Are you really? Well, because of energy, right? Like you feel like you have to conserve your energy. So, yeah. So yes, so now we are starting to think about how we can revive the pods, and we're part of Walk with a Doc. And so we would hold monthly community walks, which included a 15-minute discussion on health. And of course, we always bring you back to nutrition. And so, yes, we have some plans, a few things lined up for this year on how we can help, come back again and revive the group. Because I really feel like I walked away at 2020. I feel like I abandoned people that were kind of almost there.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
so,
And while the pandemic gave us quite a bit to be um, emotionally enthralled in, right? Just totally taken aback by. I lost a few friends, a few relatives of friends
mm,
and family due
oh,
to the pandemic. But, I can also see on the flip side the amazing advantages that we as humans and the planet got to see as, you know, good from the pandemic having occurred.
Mhm.
And one of the things for me has been having the time to think about what it's going to look like on the other side of this. Because, I can't be naive enough to know that those that were on the cusp probably found it easier to fall back
Mhm.
versus moving forward and taking the time to do their own research and figuring this out on their own, which is fine. I mean, we all have to go through our own journeys, but it also gives me the opportunity to see that we're going to have so much more ahead of us to help people with. There's more chronic illness now, and there's effects of the pandemic that we haven't even seen yet, that we'll be seeing over the next, year, two, maybe even 5 or 10 years,
Mhm.
that we need to be more prepared for.
Mhm.
And I love the pod concept. I think that it's going to come back in a stronger way than before. I think before we were talking about, I'm here in Atlanta, and at the time that I was looking for pods, it looked like they were out there, but they were gone because of the pandemic. They were just gone, and there wasn't a shift to, or at least that I could see, to the podcast and bringing those people together in a different way. One of the things that I've just been so enthused by was the chefs who actually get out there and show you, you can cook without oil, and here's how, no oil, no salt, no sugar. And so many of us have grown up with that as our heritage, as what we learned. And when we have these health issues come up, it never occurs to us that that could be a reason.
Mhm.
I know for me, having a background as an athlete and seeing some of the things that my body was going through, and knowing that, certification after certification after certification from the big guys, Emory and the American College of Sports Medicine, nobody said anything about food.
Mhm.
Just eat right. Maybe more about sleeping than about food. Sleeping in your water than it was about the food. And today I'm realizing that the food has so much more of an impact
Mhm.
on what we need to do, what we must look at to change,
Mhm.
and that change can sometimes be very difficult. So, give us an example of a client or a pod participant that you know of that has gone through that process of awakening and, becoming more aware of this change that they wanted to make because they wanted to be healthy and the results they had.
Yeah, well, here's an interesting thing. My mother is actually a patient of my husband's, because I want to say that I sort of diagnosed my mother with diabetes many years ago because I've always had this interest of health. I've been obsessed with health, even though I myself did not go into medicine or any. I'm not at all involved in healthcare, but my mother, when I was probably in my late 20s, I felt was at risk for diabetes. So I wasn't living in the same state anymore, but I remember asking them to get screened for diabetes, and I put up posters and signs everywhere in their home because I was just feeling very desperate. But at the time, V, I thought it was genetic, and I thought it was related to being Hispanic, being women. I had all these ideas in my head, um, and sure enough, probably 2 months after that last visit, both of my parents call me and they tell me that they're diagnosed with diabetes. And so they've been now 30 years, maybe 25 years living with diabetes. And as a result, my mother has had 2 strokes. And so,
Oh,
yeah, after that, after
mhm.
her last stroke, we flew her here. And I had, because she has blockages in her leg as well, I was very concerned, and my husband said, "We're going to sit down and we're going to educate her, and really not put fear, but kind of tell her, really tell her that she has control over her health. Like she doesn't have to live with diabetes. And so my mother, she came. I taught her how to cook. I basically just really taught her how to live this way. And then she lives with a sister of mine who practices a keto diet and has been doing that for quite a while, on and off, on and off. And my mother embraced this way. PCRM has offered content in Spanish. For my mother's first language is Spanish, so for her that makes a lot of sense. And 2020 was a great year for PCRM to really showcase all of this information to people who are now living with pre-existing conditions and are considered a higher risk. Well, my mother was that person who said, I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to stay put. I don't want to die from COVID. And so I invited her via online like this, to watch these programs, and I was there to answer questions. And she just went kind of real, like, strict since 2020. I think 2020 was a real wake up call for her. And the other day she calls me and she says, I'm never going back. Like, this is the way that I live. And when your sister or other people ask me, well, what are you going to do? What are you going to eat when you travel? Or what are you going to do? Well, she knows already. Like, it's at her age. She already knows how to eat and how to take care of herself, even though she's the one having to prepare all her foods because no one else in the family supports her. Um,
Mhm.
but she has taken control of her life, and that's one of the biggest message that two big messages that I have for people in general, and what we try to convey to patients at my husband's center is it's never too late. And you actually do have control over your health. No matter what the diagnosis is, we know this. There's science behind this. Documentaries are full of people telling their stories that if you have diabetes, type 2 diabetes, if you have high cholesterol, high blood pressure, concerns about your heart, there are things that you can actually do to reverse or halt or even prevent if you're not there yet. And so what I do at my husband's center is I'm more of an educator, a health and wellness educator who supports patients by bringing in information, particularly from the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, because they put together these great guides and pamphlets and information to support the doctor's office. And so when I learned about that, I said, we got to get this information out because we can't do lectures every day at the center, but anytime you're bringing in a patient, give them this handout, tell them about the events that we're offering. And so there's a lot of easy information that they can take home in terms of what to eat, how to do groceries, what are some simple meals, what are foods that you can use to replace other foods. And so I've always been an educator. I've always been a teacher, no matter what my title. I love sharing information. And so that for me has become a real passionate of mine. And I sort of want to plug this one in because I kind of said it to you before the recording, V, that we've always said, because we love this so much, we love this way of living, that as my husband moves towards retirement, we would like to practice lifestyle medicine fully, like full time. Like, this is what we want to live and teach people. And so we're working on opening up a lifestyle medicine practice here in Dallas for patients, specifically for patients who are ready to get on board. So we'll have a physician, a plant-based physician, a registered dietitian, a nurse, and also an exercise physiologist who will all support the individual in creating this change. And you can't imagine what that means to me. Like, this is my life. This is what I want to do. By most of my husband's patients have a harder time creating that change, whether it be that the smoking, they don't want to give up the smoking. Some cases are too far advanced to reverse. You cannot reverse a dead leg. And unfortunately, what you see sometimes at my husband's practice are amputations. And
Mm.
that breaks my heart because I live with him, because I hear these stories on a regular basis, because I know the suffering that takes place. I
Mhm.
just don't want to stop. And I don't want to
Mhm.
stop sharing this message. And at first I was reluctant because I said, well, I'm not a nurse. I'm not a dietitian. I'm not even a nutritionist, but I'm a heavy reader and I'm passionate. And so
Mhm.
I felt like I could help be a voice for my husband to convey this information and sort of connect people with the right people to support patients. Because we also know that you sort of have to be at a certain level of readiness to,
Mm-hmm.
to create the change. So,
Mm-hmm.
yes.
Oh my goodness, yes. I so admire and appreciate what you two are doing.
Mm,
And it's so needed. I was talking to someone the other day and was saying it would be great to be a part of a lifestyle medicine practice here in the Atlanta area and have a place where you can do like pods and the have a little area for watching the movies and the potlucks and the things like that. And so I just love the fact that that is the direction that you guys are headed, because I think that as time goes on, they are going to be so much more popular. And there's a couple of things from my perspective as to reasons why. Not only are people going to say, I'm tired, I'm really tired of being sick, and somebody said there was a way out, let me see. And so there will be that curious person. But there's also going to be the person that says, I've got to find a way. And you talk about being ready. I love that, because that is that next step. But the other thing is, and I want people to hear this too, one of the things that I've realized that we have not been trained well to do is to communicate with our doctors,
mm,
letting them know exactly what's wrong with us and not stopping until we feel satisfied with a course of action that doesn't just treat the symptom, but actually goes to why is this happening, the root cause. And I know that, in medical school, that is not necessarily what medical students are taught. And I think that we're at a point in time now where schools are recognizing, and the doctors who do have influence, who are part of this community, are actually mandating that these schools, these universities, and medical schools actually look at adding some additional degree of nutritional education to the curriculum. But there's another aspect of this, which for me, doctors are people too. And doctors who think that, eating the dead cow who's gone through all that they've gone through is something that they're subscribing to themselves, they're likely to have some of these health issues that we're talking about other people having. But the doctor's not going to sit there and tell you, I'm somebody who's dealing with my own degree of diabetes, and, I might be a um, eye doctor, or, a family practice physician. But they're also not open to hearing other things, and they feel, you know, uh, uh, an affront when someone says, well, I don't want to go on medication. Is there another way? And this doctor is just adamant, and they don't have to be old. They can be, of the not the youngest generation, because I think that they're the most open to looking at the whole food plant-based lifestyle piece of practicing medicine.
mhm.
Are you in the space of having doctors to come to you to find out, you and Dr. Riz, what are you doing? How are you doing this for your patients,
Mm.
and getting themselves educated in that respect?
Well, that has been a goal of mine. It's been a huge goal probably from the start is how can we get more doctors on board? I would love to be able to say, and in our Facebook group, we're always asked, is there a plant-based so-and-so specialist in Dallas? And I always respond with, if there were, I would have already shared that. And it's so frustrating for me to know that there are not enough people that are taking interest in. I mean, we're one of the top, one of the largest cities in the country. You would think that, we would have a handful of plant-based physicians. So we are working on that. I will tell you, my husband is a lot more aggressive at the hospital. He likes to tell stories of how the people that work with him in surgery during the procedures are sort of held captive by him. So he says, I have a captive audience. And he tells them, he talks about food. And, it's not rare for him to come and say, guess who got on board? And it's usually the techs and the nurses and everyone else that's involved. But that's how it starts, right? By sharing information. He got the CEO of his hospital to go 90% plant based. And it took the book, I want to say it was How Not to Die, followed by the longevity diet,
Uh-huh.
because some individuals need the science. Some
Yeah.
individuals need proof that, this way of living is the best way. I know that Riz has said also in the past that for him it was an insult to hear this. This is an individual who has dedicated years of training and studying to be the best. And, there are different levels, but a vascular surgeon has probably more training than a cardiologist in some ways. They do additional things. And so, years and years of becoming an expert so that he can save lives. That's his whole goal. Sometimes, and I sort of want to clarify too, some people think that a vascular surgeon is a cardiologist, but he I consider him like the plumber that goes into our arteries and cleans out the arteries and the veins throughout the body, except the heart and except the brain. So you have the cardiologist and the neurologist, the brain surgeon. And I'm not an expert, so correct me, if I'm wrong. But what he does is he does save lives. So he clears carotid arteries, blockages in the legs, so he can save limbs. And so the whole goal has been to to do this to save his patients' lives. So it was an insult for him to have someone who is not in medicine say, you can actually save your patients' lives with food. And sometimes people forget or may not know that depending on your training, you actually, as a physician, may not start making any money till you're in your mid 30s because you spend all of those years in school, in residency and training. And so you think if I've invested so many years of my life to becoming, an excellent doctor, well, if nutrition were important, that would have been included as part of the package. And unfortunately, it's not. Some individuals say they may receive one class or a handful of hours in terms of the importance of nutrition, but the industry itself, the field, doesn't emphasize food as medicine. And so it can be an insult to physicians, especially also, I think it matters how the information is presented. And you sort of touched on it a little bit. I do feel that we have to be very gentle with how we speak with providers in healthcare out of respect. I think it's
Mm-hmm.
important to respect people where they are. And also, people tend to be a little bit more open. Last year, I had a well woman exam with my OB-GYN, and she says to me, so as we're having the exam, she says, so what do you do for a living? And I said, well, I have a podcast where I share information about the power of food and exercise. But before that, I had asked her if she had any foods that she would recommend in order to reduce my tendencies to have hot flashes as I'm moving into menopause. And she said, no, there's nothing that can be done. This is part of going through the phase of menopause. And so after I told her what I do for a living, she came back later and she said, well, I think there are some foods that you might be able to use to help prevent any recurrence of hot flashes. And I think she was a little embarrassed, but I think it's important to be gentle in the way that we speak with people, or even take some books and say, hey, if you ever have a chance to read this, I think you might find some of the content to be interesting. And I also want to touch on something that you said, V, about patience in general, because it's so important to me. And I try to emphasize this on the podcast as well, is that I sort of see myself as a patient advocate. I want to help empower individuals when they're at their doctor's office. I know that there are, and we saw this during COVID, that there are disparities in healthcare. There are racial biases when it comes to certain individuals going into their doctor's office. And I'm also learning about gaslighting, that some
Mhm.
physicians gaslight women.
Medical gaslighting.
It,
Mm-hmm.
yes, especially
Mm-hmm.
women, because we
Mm-hmm.
we feel things. We know when something is wrong. We have this high intuitive way of communicating, of understanding what's going on with us. And then when we show up at the physician's office and we say we think there's something wrong, the doctor will say it's all in your head. Kind of dismissing what might be going on with us. And so I think when we have these conversations that these things are real, that we validate that, yes, sometimes we are made to feel dumb in the doctor's office. We're intimidated by the physician, that white coat syndrome thing that they talk about, I think. And we're intimidated so much so that we don't know how to ask questions. And that really became aware. It became apparent to me even more with my own mother when I would say, "Well, what did your doctor say?" And she would say, "I don't know. I didn't understand him." So I said, "Can you ask your physician if it's okay just to record the audio conversation so that someone else can help understand what's going on?" But I've given her kind of tools on how to speak up. But that's my whole goal is with these conversations is to help people feel comfortable with their physician. So you don't have to be an expert in whatever condition you're facing, but just know how to talk to your patient and how to your doctor, and also, encourage you not to feel so intimidated. I mean, I've gone through my own experiences where I can feel I'm being spoken down to, but I stand my ground and I'm gentle in my approach when I'm communicating so that I'm not degrading the other person, because it's then the conversation that you want to happen won't happen that way.
I totally agree. And I think that for a lot of us, um, holding that grace towards our doctor who may not know, and going out and doing so that when we go back and can show these positive results, the doctor's asking the question, "So, what have you been doing?"
Mm-hmm.
And then you have the opportunity to say, well, I started this plant-based diet and I feel better. I think that it's addressing, and the doctor is looking at it from a scientific perspective. They're looking at the numbers, right? Has your this gone up or down? And has this gone up or down? And they're then may be impacted to find out a little more about what it
Yes.
is that you're doing. I know that I've had the opportunity a couple of times to get that question asked, and I've asked the doctor, "Have you heard of the China study?" And and then to be able to say that several of the doctors that I know that are in this space have said that it was reading the China study that got them started with
Mm.
understanding the impact
Mm-hmm.
of food on our medical conditions.
Mm-hmm.
And so another really great segue into the movement. Do you find that this movement is rather age specific, or do you see, more millennials, Gen Xers, or boomers, or combination of these groups really wanting to come into understanding this information and the change that it's causing health
Mm-hmm.
wise?
That's an excellent question, and I've asked the question myself, and I could say that I see some patterns without wanting to necessarily generalize, because it's amazing. You meet people like Dr. Will Tuttle, who is probably, I think, in his 70s. And I want to say that he learned about this way of living in his 20s, or, and that was many years ago. So, in terms of like when he came upon this information, what I find interesting too. So I'm part of the American College of Lifestyle Medicine's Women's Health Interest Group, and so it's a group of physicians that come together that all know about lifestyle medicine and other experts in the field, dietitians and coaches. And so we have these conversations of how can we convey this information to younger women, right? So you wonder how can you reach out to different pockets of people. So, for example, we know that many of the people that come to this with health conditions are usually people that are over 40 years old. They're either people who have already started to see heart disease in their family, and they want to prevent it or are now facing conditions like diabetes, heart disease, high blood pressure. So they're starting to see that, oh my goodness, I'm going down this path and it could get worse. So usually when people at that age come to embracing a whole food plant-based lifestyle, it's because of their own health. And then you see pockets of, say, younger women too. When we were talking about how to outreach to younger women, it's usually related to something that a young woman faces hormonally. So it may have endometriosis or fertility issues, painful cramps, acne, things that affect the younger women. And then they're looking to see, what can I do to clear my skin? What can I do to improve my chances of becoming fertile or conceiving, or maybe they're interested in having a healthier pregnancy. So it depends, I think, on the phase that you're in, and your age, I think, can play a significant role. We know that when you see like vegan activists, they tend to be younger people that care about animals, have compassion for animals and the planet. So that's a driving force in terms of changing your way of eating. If you understand the literature and understand that our rainforests are being destroyed to make room for animals to graze or to grow the crops that the cows, for example, consume, if you know that we're destroying the rainforest to add meat on our table, then you're doing it because of the environment. And we see that a lot of young people care about our planet. And then you see people in all areas of life, all ages, that are embracing this. But typically, yes, we see that animal welfare is important to certain groups. And then people like myself came to this because of health. And then I learned about the impact that consuming animal-based products has on the animals and, of course, the planet. Um, and so, yeah, and also then you see, like, for example, we were talking about physicians. When you present the science to individuals like scientists, uh, then they are more likely to make the change because they see that they can help a broader group of people or patients by teaching them about eating whole foods. So,
Mhm.
yes.
Love it. And yes, I thoroughly agree. I think that there's motivations in every age group, and there's definitely opportunities across the board. I would
Yes.
love to see more about nutrition being taught in medical schools, but it takes those of us who are out here now, including the doctors who are also advocating for this kind of a lifestyle, to impact the schools and the curriculums. And, why wait to medical school? We should
Hmm.
be teaching this in high school, in elementary and middle school, because the that's where it all begins. That's where it can start. And, if we can bypass the biases of parents and really get to the young people, I think that we have an even greater opportunity for generations to come to feel the benefits of us coming into this knowledge and this energy, that's
Hmm.
going to help sustain our planet.
And it,
Because, mhm,
you're right. Sorry to interrupt.
that's okay.
You're right, because I'm thinking that as you're saying that, the different areas where we can bring this message, that's part of what pods can do as well. So, pod leaders in their community could outreach to schools to help educate children on how to plant a garden. Children love being involved with growing food, they love being part of food preparation. And we sort of have forgotten that because of life and the busyness, the culture we live in. We've all moved away from the kitchen and the dining table. But I think that's the part that I love about this way of living, is that we're coming back to the kitchen. We're coming back to sitting down and enjoying a good meal with our loved ones. And so pod leaders can be very involved in that. And one more thing I wanted to add before I forget this is that I am part of the pod advisory committee for PlantPure communities. It's a small group of pod leaders from all over the world. There are about 9 of us, or 10, And what we're doing, and we've been doing behind the scenes since 2021, is coming up with ways that we can support pod leaders that have perhaps might have given up on, influencing their community, probably because we've been limited, so we can't get together with anyone. But people are slowly making their way back to coming together with the community. And so, what we're planning to do is create classes and information on how to support, how to encourage pod leaders to come back as a leader and then continue to do the work so that we can reach out to parents and educate parents in schools and collaborate with other people in our community. So, I just wanted to add
So,
that.
thank you for doing that because I did want to even ask you, how would one who's interested in either becoming a pod leader or a pod co-leader or just starting a group in their area, what's the first step?
Well, first go to their website. It's plantpurecommunities.org. Learn about PlantPure communities, or I would even say just watch the documentary PlantPure Nation. It's still available on YouTube free of charge. It's about over an hour or so. Watch the movie because that's gonna get you. That's gonna like really excite you. And then go to yes the website plantpurecommunities.org, and there's a link to learn about the pod network that you can actually see a map, look for a location near you, in your state, near your city, and first see is there a pod that is already established and try to touch base with the leaders. Most of them link back to their Facebook groups, and so you'll be able to do that. And then, if you're interested in becoming a pod leader, if this is something that you want to do and you have the energy and you're excited, then I would say go to the website still. And there's information on how you can get started. And it's a beautiful experience to be a leader in your community and to know, because we want to share this information. We don't want to
Mm-hmm.
keep it to ourselves. If we can help save lives, if we can help improve our environment, our world, and protect animals, then why wouldn't we want to continue to spread the message? And churches and other institutions are great places that are willing to, and libraries. I don't know how the situation is now, but libraries also used to host our lectures. So there are plenty of people that want adult education the way that we're offering it.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And now that I'm looking at wrapping our show up, which we could probably go on and on with this,
Right?
such a great conversation. Um, Let me just ask you, is there any wisdom, something that you believe to be impactful that you'd like to impart on our audience and share with us so that we can go from here and just be yet a better version of ourselves? What advice would you give us? What's the wisdom you want to
Yes.
share?
So I was sharing with you that I saw your recent interview with Mariquita Solis, and I felt like I could identify with what she was saying. Two things that really stood out was one of them was be gentle with yourself. I mean, I started my own journey in high school uh, with starving myself, and I suffered with anorexia. Just the whole eating disorder and diet culture really can have a tremendous impact on a woman. So it's a journey. Be gentle with yourself. And the other thing that I really love is spending time in nature. And I know Mariquita also mentioned it a lot, but that's where it's my safe haven. It's spending time in nature is where I feel that there's so much more than the limiting beliefs that we have, that life really offers so much more, and that nature really supports us. Like, nature reminds us of who we are, nature feeds us, nature nurtures us like mother would. And so I love, for me, when I'm at a park or a place where there are a lot of trees like a forest, I feel like it's a refuge for me. And so I just want to encourage people that it could feel like a lot, like you have so much to do before you get to where you want to be. So during those moments, and don't even wait for that, but make sure that you spend time in nature, that you take walks with your loved ones, and that you reminded that the whole purpose of all of this is really already in us. That peace and that joy that we want is in us, and nature helps to bring that out. And nature will guide us the right way so that we can eat healthier foods. And I noticed that the more plants that I ate, the more I came back to the spiritual part that I was interested in many years ago. So I feel like I'm more connected now because of the foods that I eat.
Beautiful. Wow. Thank you so much for all that you've brought to our show today. I'm so grateful to have been able to be in this conversation with you. And I do want our audience to know that you can get Maya's contact information, the link to the website, and to her LinkedIn page will be posted below this video. So do reach out. And I love the idea about the pods. If you're interested in starting a pod, if you're in the Atlanta, Georgia area
Yes.
and interested, hit me up because I'm interested too.
Yes.
So, it's easier in the numbers, but
Mhm.
I encourage everyone, if you enjoyed this show as much as I did, please do us the favor of sharing. And join us next week when we have another great show, another great topic. You can find full episodes on our website, on YouTube. Again, you'll find all that information below this video. And turn on your notifications on YouTube and Facebook. Um, like our Facebook page and join us again. Once again, thank you, Maya. This has just been amazing. So
Mm,
appreciate and love
thank
you.
you. Thank you
Keep
so
doing
much.
your good work, and I'm sure we're going to be seeing each other. We've got a lot that can go on from
Yes.
here.
Thank you.
So you're welcome and thanks. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. And remember, until next time, be well, live, love, and be a bigger positive impact maker in your world. And we'll see you next time. Bye for now.